W logo, it's CSS is hard, okay? To be fair, I zoomed in. Zoomed in CSS is effectively impossible to get right, okay? No website has ever got it right, okay? Oh, Julia. Sorry, I couldn't read that. Julia Evans. Fear makes you a worse programmer. Okay, I'm curious where this is going, okay? Is Julia saying that I should not be afraid? Should we use XZ 5.6.1? Not afraid? I'm not afraid. Don't be afraid. Anyways, yesterday morning, I asked Twitter, does anyone have a good rating about fear plus programming and how being afraid to make important changes makes you a worse programmer? And I feel like there's a really important line between caution, A++, excellent, and fear, which holds you back from doing necessary work. This may be one of those topics where I am categorically bad at relating to. And maybe it's the acoustics in this room, but if there's a challenge, whether at work or in my personal life, I've never went, oh, I can't do that. I always thought, no matter how hard this is, I can do it. I can do this, and I will figure it out. And I've never really had this thing that holds me back due to fear of being of failure. And I think maybe I have a broken brain. Maybe I'm neurodivergent. I should put that on my Twitter handle. Neurodivergent, confidence too high. But it's something you learn with time. I never had that problem from the beginning, right? From the very, very beginning, I've never thought I couldn't do something. Me and a friend were laughing because we call it our toxic trait, where I see someone do anything, juggling swords, and I'm like, I could do that, right? Like, I just think I could do anything. Like, I see anyone doing anything, and I'm like, yeah, I could probably do that. I could probably do that. Literally, I'm hold my beer guy, and for better or for worse, here I am. What are you afraid of? I mean, there's, like, things to be afraid of. Like, I wouldn't want to get tortured to death, right? I wouldn't want to go out like that. I'm neurodivergent, too. I know. Does that make me neurodivergent? Oh, my goodness. Did I just receive Twitter clout? I'm here for a good time, not a long time. Wow. Did I just receive Twitter clout? Am I officially Twitter clouded? Can I put that in my bio? Anyways, a lot of super interesting discussion ensued. So I may not be able to add a lot to this just because of that kind of broken perspective in some sense, where I think I can do anything. We'll find out. A lot of super interesting discussion ensued, and I'd like to talk about some of it. Before I start, Ryan Kennedy linked me to this slide deck of a presentation he gave at Fear-Driven Development, which I absolutely loved, and I think you should look at it. I think my favorite sentence from the presentation is, fear creates local maximums. Okay. I find that when I'm afraid, I become super conservative. We cannot possibly make this change. What if it breaks? And this means worse software. It actually kind of disastrous. If you are scared of making changes, you can't make something dramatically better or do the big code cleanup. Maybe you can't even deploy the code that you already wrote and tested because it feels too scary. You just want to stick to what's sort of working, even if it's not great. I mean, I think one thing that could be kind of real about this is that if you don't have any form of metrics to know that you're even breaking, right? Like, if you don't even know that things are breaking, I would be cautious for sure on making big changes. One time I made a change at Netflix that broke that if you pressed add to my list on the billboard of the website, it went into an infinite loop. React. Okay? React. Did a little state change, did a little re-render, did a little state change, did a little re-render. And I just literally froze the site. You had to close the tab. Smooth move, I know. And we missed it. I don't know what happened. I did that, though. It seems like we should have caught that in our testing. I thought we did. Must have goofed that one up. A lot of people brought up tools and processes, in particular a fantastic Keesley Gilmore Enos, who has a new to me things to say about better process for testing code every time I talk to her. Kelsey, I thought it was Keesley. Wow, I was way off. I have open source in my brain. I know you're talking about more psychologically, but this one is one of my main reasons I believe investing in tests early is important. I believe writing your code to be testable and thinking ahead of time of how you're going to test it and how you're going to ensure that changes don't break things is very important. Again, I have a very simple approach, which is if you can't get it right first try, you should test it. I usually use tests as a way to drive development because if I can't get it right the first try, it means I'm going to have a really long and annoying testing cycle for me to make it right. Therefore, I will write a test once I've written something complicated. It's the opposite of TDD, really. It's still the opposite of TDD. I decide all the APIs and everything beforehand, and then after I get done doing it, I then do the next thing. So like Harpoon, my most recent change to Harpoon, I added a whole bunch of I've added a new feature in which is very, very complicated, which allows for holes inside the lists. Nils inside the list. So for me to be able to validate that this is true, I first wrote everything, and then now I'm just going through and I'm just testing everything in my head. I like to do it in 2 different tries. So being able to drive testability is really, really important. And I've added in all the hooks and software for me to be able to do it. Even this one right here, equals. I can override how I determine the equality of list items within Harpoon itself. So I like it. I think it's good. So I do agree. Thinking about testing should always be one of your first steps, right? Holes in the list is Lua's Achilles heel. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Obsessive monitoring, CI, canary deploys, chat ops, dog fooding, self-serve infra. Yeah, all those are very, very good. So here's a few tools or ways, tools and processes to make us less afraid. I don't know if afraid is the right word though. Like if you're just deploying into production with absolutely no way to monitor, I don't think being afraid to do that is anything but wise. You should be greatly worried about that. You're making changes with no observability. It feels kind of crazy to me. Just raw dog in production, that feels really, really difficult. Version control means that you can make changes to your code without being scared of losing old versions. This is this one is so basic to me now, I can't even imagine how afraid I would be if I were programming without version control. Yeah, I mean, version control is so cheap too. I can't even imagine programming. Like, I don't even know how to program without version control at this point. It's git init, git add dot, move on, right? It's not about fear. It's about irresponsibility. Yeah, I think you're being affected. Like, to me, this sounds like irresponsibility, or maybe not irresponsibility. That might be a little too hard of a word, because some people, if you don't even know it's there, kind of like one of those unknown unknowns, you may not even realize that it's a problem, right? It could just be sheer ignorance, right? Right? If you know, I've been ignorant of a lot of things. It's taken a long time for me to learn a lot of stuff. So many people mentioned testing as a way to build confidence. I don't think testing is a way to build confidence. I think it's a way to ensure that it hasn't broken in ways that you think it could break. And that's it. Testing doesn't build confidence for me. It maintains confidence for me. And that's it. I think there's a big difference. And I always assume that all my code has bugs in it, no matter how much testing I do. My favorite thing I've read about testing is from Working Effectively with Legacy Code, where every chapter title is something that's scary or difficult about working with legacy code. He defines legacy code as code without tests, to give you a flavor. Oh, that's a strange way to define legacy code. I think we should probably not define legacy code that way, just because that's kind of confusing. For instance, I don't understand the code well enough to change it. How do I know that I'm not breaking anything? I don't have much time and I have to change it. You know, surprisingly, I don't get fear for any of those things. Like, yeah, I'm a bit hesitant. I try to test things myself, but at some point I go, well, this is as good as we can get. I have no testing infrastructure. Let's go for it, right? This tweet from Uncle Bob Martin explains this idea pretty well. Even with good test design, without tests, you feel fear of change, and so code will rot. With good tests, there's no fear, so you'll clean the code. I disagree with that too. Generally, I disagree with that because it depends on the size and scope of the tests, right? If you change, it totally depends on the size and scope. Like right now, again, returning to Harpoon, I have this whole list functionality, and I'm adding a bunch of new functionality and changing things, but I also have a bunch of integration tests, right, that kind of go through and change this. So if I can prove with my integration tests that these still work, then I'll be more confident that this worked. But if I change the interface, then I have to go through and change all the tests. And if I change all the tests, then am I confident? Did I misdo the tests? I don't know. Like, it really just depends. You know, it really just depends on the level in which the test changes, right? I have zero confidence. Like, you know, I think the word is good test. I know, but good test is such a bullshit word. And what I mean by a bullshit word is that how good are you at good tests? I think I'm pretty good, but I don't think I'm always that good. Just saying. I think I say that word a lot, and I might not be saying that word well. Good is like, yeah, you're right. Test that. Here's the problem is that you get into the fallacy. You pretty much run into the dark forest of tests. How do you know a test is good? You have a test that breaks sometimes. Is that test bad? Is infrastructure bad? Is the person who made it kind of a dummy? Is the person who made it really, really good? Because it's green? Yeah, is it green? Is that the reason why it's good? Like that, none of those are good reasons. But testing and version control are not the only tools we have. We can also build QA environments where breaking things is totally allowed and encouraged, deploys that go out a little bit at a time, the slow clap, the ability to roll back and deploy easily. That's good. QA teams whose job is to exhaustively test software. I'm curious about the future of AI teams. I think that's a very interesting area to think about with AI and enough data about how your users use the application. I think there's like a really interesting area that exists where if you have if you have how users use your application and you can take an AI to just continuously run effectively against your application, just walking like a user kind of walks, like a fuzzing, like a UI fuzzing, it'd be very, very interesting. And when I say how the AI walks, what I mean by that is that it's able to grab a screenshot and loosely say this is a kind of what we would expect. I know there's a lot of research at plenty of places looking for this kind of basic answer. Walking as a gradient descent? I'm curious. And if you put in enough asserts, there's something to it, right? If you can put in enough asserts, and you do enough just random stochastic walking, I don't know. Could be interesting. Wouldn't that just create, by definition, a just crack or treadmill? Probably. Or threadmill? A dummy protection is a must. But AI can't do dummy protection. Facts. I mean, if you have every way a users use your app, then there is some level of which you can reproduce how a dummy uses your app. But we'll see. Depends on how it's changed, right? Like optimizing humor and action in general is kind of sketchy. Yeah. Tools that will email you if your program throws an exception, and a lot more. Get hit with an email. Yeah. Fear of retribution and blameless postmortems. But tools and processes are absolutely not the only thing. Even if I have amazing tools and QA systems and the best deploys and well-tested testing code, I'm still going to make mistakes sometimes. And what happens when I make mistakes is really critical. Etsy and Google and Stripe, where I work, all have blameless postmortems. This means that if you make a change that breaks something, people talk about what happened by focusing on the change and the facts, not blaming you. The reason why I don't like this is that if you break things regularly, people are counting. People are keeping score. People are most certainly keeping score. And so that's where a lot of these things are, where it's just like, yeah, it's blameless and all these things, but is it blameless? Yeah, I'm sure they bring up the score with people who are breaking enough. Yeah, it becomes talk behind their back. I don't think that this somehow creates a good culture. I really don't think this creates good cultures. I don't know if the other way creates good cultures either. I'm not offering a solution. I'm just offering an observation that I'm not convinced this is a net positive. Maybe it's less about blame and more about the ability to come out and say you effed up and just plainly say what you did. Yeah. To me, that's like what it comes down to is like if everyone's just kind of a grown up and just, put the big boy pants on, just say, yeah, I messed up. How do we fix this? How do we prevent this from happening again? The thing is you actually get quite a few. You get quite a few oopsie daisies before people look at you like you need to improve, right? It takes quite a bit of time, right? And the more, the reality is the more accountability you take, typically people are more lenient with you. I also realized that this goes much further than programming, and Mark linked me to an amazing site about restorative justice. I'm not sure what that means. Anytime there's an adjective with justice, I get confused by it, which you should also go read. So if you blame people for breaking things, they'll become more scared to make changes in the future, and you'll end up with worse programs. I don't know if I'm not sure if I buy. I think this is a bit of a logical leap. The problem that I have generally with this take is that I think you always being afraid is more of a problem than you trying to set up a system that prevents you from having the fear in general. I think addressing the root cause for me, this seems like symptom curing. That's how I look at it, is that you're trying to avoid people having the symptom as opposed to figuring out what's the cure. Anyways, one last thing that fear-driven development talks about that really resonates with me was some fears are irrational. Very true, and they can infect other people. If you deploy, something goes wrong, and you figure out the cause and fix the problem, and nobody yells at you. Hopefully, future deploys should not be that scary. Yeah. I mean, I do understand if you're new at a job and your first time putting out code, there's probably a little bit of hesitation, for sure. I have the problem with calling it fear because I don't really feel afraid. I just like, oh man, I got to make sure I've checked all the boxes and that I do good here. But because we are only human and not logical robots, sometimes they still are. And maybe you feel nervous about doing deploys for a while until you see that things are really usually fine. I think there's a lot more to be said about irrational fears, and I'd be interested to hear more. This year was the first year that I worked on a large software system that affected lots of people, and it's been scary sometimes. Next year will be the second year, and my plan is for it to be easier. I mean, I really like the highlighting of irrational fears because I think almost all of us are. I think not all of us. A lot of us have irrational fears on this thing, right? And I think that if you look at most of the things you think are scary, they're all irrational. I'll give you an example. A lot of people are very afraid of whiteboard interviews. Coming in a huge code base can be scary. If you think it's scary, that's such the wrong word. Overwhelming, much better word. Whelming, probably even the best word. Scary is a strange one, but let's go back to whiteboard interviews. It can also be underwhelming. After you've seen it, you might realize the code is garbage, and then you're underwhelmed by the quality. But when I talk about whiteboard interviews, I see a lot of people that are like, they say how scared they are about the whiteboard interview. And I get very curious or confused by the statement because there's a couple things that are true. The interviewer could ask you something that you do not know, right? I mean, that's really where the fear kind of breaks down to, is that you're going to be asked a question in which you cannot answer. But what happens if you're asked a question that you can answer? How have you increased your surface area of questions that you can't answer? Can you answer those questions? If you feel like you have a pretty good surface area, you've done a lot of studying, you've really thought about your craft, you've been doing it for a while, then why are you afraid? The chance of them asking you some question you don't know always exists. Like, why are you focusing on the negative side of things? It's kind of irrational. Yeah, and that's why we call it an irrational fear. Like, but that's why you logically think through the situation. Like, what cures a lot of fear is being logical about your approach. Of course, anxiety sucks, and it's definitely. I mean, there's definitely a trained habit within anxiety as well. And what I mean by a trained habit is that if you feel fear and you just sit there and let it control you, and you change how you act because of fear, that makes you, like, technically a coward. And by doing that, you've just allowed whatever that behavioral pattern to set in stronger. There's this phrase that people say, which is neurons that fire together, wire together. And so if you allow these things to happen, then you're going to do that. You're gonna allow those things to wire together. See, by the way, this is a very stupid phrase. Damn cowards won't play in traffic. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. If you somehow equate a whiteboard interview and being afraid you might be asked a question that you're not going to get versus doing something that's objectively dangerous, you are a moron, right? Like you're genuinely a moron. Okay, so don't be a moron. Be at least a little clever. Okay? At least think about things before you say them, right? Moron is a strong word. It's not a strong word. You're being a moron. If you cannot hear somebody say something without thinking of the most objectable or obviously bad faith argument possible, then you are being a moron. That's what a moron does, okay? A fool might be a better word. And so that's how I think about it, which is there's always a chance you'll fail, no matter what. In any activity you do, there's a chance you'll fail. Think about it this way. Take the best free throw shooter in the world, has been practicing their entire lifetime. What's their percentage? It's not 100%. They can't even reproduce a physical shot over and over again. They can't do a physical motion over and over again the same 100% of the time. So imagine something that's significantly more complex, right? So why should you expect not to fail sometimes? It's not a critique of your character. It's literally that this is an expectation. This should be what you think should happen, right? And so that's where I have a lot of the problems with these things, is that people generate all these fears, and they want the world to change around them because the world is scary, because there might be failure. Like, yeah, the world will always have failure. You cannot protect yourself against failure. Embrace the fact you're going to fail. And it's going to just destroy a huge percentage of your anxiety over these kind of things. Like, if you willingly embrace that, it's going to be good. But I'll say the inverse, which is that if you constantly make decisions in which you accept the fear and say, I'm going to change what I'm doing because of fear, you are going to become more afraid. There's no staying in one position. You can never stay in one place. You'll either become more afraid or you'll become less afraid. There is no stagnant. Failure is growth. Exactly. Do you know how scary it is to go on stage and talk in front of people? Every single time. Every single time. I feel awful. It's why I don't like to hold microphones whenever I do it. You know what I mean? Every single time I go onto a stage, it feels awful. But you will never be able to detect it from my voice. You know why? Because when I go up there, I make a commitment to my heart that when I walk on there, I'm going to go on there and I'm going to just speak with my chest, and I'm just going to say it, and I'm not going to flinch. And on my inside, if I hold a microphone, I'm shaking. I'm shaking wildly. But externally, I have made the choice. I will just defeat that. I just refuse to give into any sort of like fear like that, or anxiety around things. You can't let yourself be dictated by it. Right? You really don't want to be dictated by that thing, because you will significantly hinder your growth as a person and in your life if you expect the world to become a safer place for you rather than you to become a more brave person for the world. I'm not saying it's easy, by the way. Like I said, I shake like someone just said, I shake like an old alcoholic when I get on stage, and I hope I never have to hold a mic. Right? I hope I never have to hold a mic while doing it. But if you give me a mic and say, you have to hold this mic and go speak in front of 1,000 people right now, I'll do it. And I'm going to shake, and I'm going to feel like I look like an idiot, but I'm going to go out there and I'm going to speak with all of my chest, and I'm going to just absolutely go all in on it. Anyways, sorry. Fear can make you freeze, or it can inspire you to move. Yeah, it's true. The whole fight or flight thing, right? That's why mentorship is important. Yeah, I agree with that. Anyways, sorry that, I'm not saying it's easy. I hope the takeaway people have isn't that it's easy. And you know what? Some of you will have more anxiety, and some of you will have less anxiety, right? We all have permutations. Like TJ is probably the best programmer I've ever met. Hands down, probably the best programmer I have ever met. And part of that is because he practices and does a lot of work. But the other part of it is because he is, he's just born talented. The man is just simply born talented. If you don't know Tej, Lauren said, who's Tej? You haven't met me? Facts. Okay, I don't know why Tej didn't show up here. Tej, where's Tej? There you go. Twitch TV, Tej DV. But yeah, like genuinely, clearly physically gifted, but also has worked hard. And so I know variations exist, right? All variations exist. Some people, you know what the worst part about a lot of these things? Like, you go in an interview and some people won't like you for some stupid ass reason, right? Some people could hear my voice and just not like it. Oh, I don't like this guy. And now guess what? You're fighting an uphill battle. You got to not only impress the person, but you got to like now overcome someone not liking you for some stupid immutable feature, right? And that does exist. So anyways, just something to think about. And I don't want you guys to get all, Anyways, sorry, I feel strongly about this topic. Okay, I didn't think I was going to have a lot to say, but man, it turns out I feel very strongly about it. The reason why I feel so strongly about it, here's the reason why I feel so strongly about it. When I read this article, do you know what my takeaway to this is? Julia views herself as a victim in her own story. That's how I take it. Now, that may not be true. I don't want to overstep anything, but that's how I take it. And I don't mean that like victim mentality. I mean like she's already losing and needs to fight. And it's, like, it's very, very hard and very, scary. Where it's just like, don't be the victim in your own story. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard. It's not easy. I've had a lot of very shockingly mean things said to me in groups of people over my career. And, it's hard. It can make you feel bad. It can make you feel like you're not good enough. It's hard. There always will be people that aren't fun to work with, that aren't good. You know what I mean? But you can do it. You can still do it. Programming is a little bit less scary than, say, being a cop. Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole different level of scary. Imagine approaching a car that just 1 out of 1,000 times you might get shot at. That's kind of scary. Anyways, so there you go. Don't do that. Be careful. Be careful. It's okay to be hesitant. It's okay to cross your I's and dot your T's and make sure you're doing the right stuff. But don't shy away from challenge because it might be scary. You will forever and forever never live up to your true calling.